Well, good morning. Good morning, Whitworth. Despite the smoke, God has given us a wonderful day today to celebrate the beginning of Whitworth's 128th academic year. And like Dr. Simon, I want to add my personal welcome to all of our new students, whether you be traditional undergraduate students or graduate students. Some of our continuing studies students are here today. We certainly want to welcome you. And we also welcome back all of our returning students today. We welcome you back with enthusiasm. Welcome home. We're glad that you're here as well. Faculty, staff, you all are looking particularly good today. Good to see all of you, and thank you for your important work. I want to thank trustees John Sowers and Eric Peterson for being here today, leading our procession. And I certainly want to give a warm welcome to my predecessor, President Emeritus Bill Robinson, and his wife, Bonnie. Welcome. We're glad that you're here. Well, the title of my convocation address today is The University and Moral Clarity, something I'm sure I'll be able to tackle in the next 15 minutes. It's a direct ripoff from the title of an article that appeared 3 weeks ago in the Chronicle of Higher Education. That article was titled, "For Moral Clarity, Don't Look to Universities." It was a timely and compelling opinion piece written by Chad Wellman, one of the newest faculty members at the University of Virginia. Now, you may recall that the University of Virginia, that venerable institution of higher learning founded by none other than Thomas Jefferson and located in Charlottesville, was the epicenter last month of one of the ugliest public demonstrations of overt racism, hatred, and bigotry our country has seen in quite some time. Who could have imagined that in 2017, hundreds of white supremacists and neo-Nazis would be so bold as to carry lit torches onto the grounds of the university there in Charlottesville, right onto the lawn of the hallowed academical village there at UVA, chanting slogans like, "Jews will not replace us," and "blood and soil," eerie echoes of similar mantras heard in 1930s Nazi Germany. How many of us shuddered to see such blatant hatred expressed toward blacks and other non-white races, shouted from legions of mostly white men dressed in khakis and polo shirts, elevating not just flaming torches that evening, but also symbols of white nationalism, including the Confederate flag, not, as they claimed, to celebrate and protect Southern culture and history, but rather to bully and to intimidate, to threaten and to spew venom. As I watched news reports of these events, it was as if I was having an out-of-body experience. I was numb in disbelief. Chad Wellman, the author of this article, viewed this nefarious demonstration out of the front window of his small campus apartment where he lives with his wife and children and where he serves as principal of Brown College, one of UVA's residential colleges. It was a frightening scene, as Wellman describes it. But Wellman wrote his article not just to provide a riveting firsthand account of the riots that evening, but to argue a point that I want us to consider briefly this morning. And that point is this, as the author argues, that the contemporary university is institutionally incapable of moral clarity. Let me repeat that. Wellman's thesis is that the contemporary university is incapable of moral clarity. Well, right or wrong, Wellman's critique is a scathing one, particularly when one traces the history of so many of this country's finest colleges and universities back to the founding Christian congregations, churches, and denominations of this country. Now, I realize that the University of Virginia has always been a public university, and as such, has always espoused a non-sectarian commitment. UVA does not share a history with, say, Harvard College, which was founded by Puritans and Congregationalists, or Brown University, which was founded by Baptists, or Whitworth's antecedent, Princeton University, founded by Presbyterians. But Wellman did not discriminate in making his bold assertion. He wasn't just talking about the University of Virginia. He was directing his critique about the inability to demonstrate moral clarity toward the academy in general, to all colleges and universities. Well, briefly, Wellman's argument can be summarized this way. The contemporary university, large, complex research institutions like the University of Virginia and smaller, more intimate colleges and universities like Whitworth are many things to many people. They are a health center, a federal contractor, a sports franchise, an event venue, a landlord, and almost incidentally, yes, a place devoted to education and knowledge. 50 years ago, Clark Kerr, then the president of the University of California, introduced the concept of the multiversity, describing the modern university as an institution with, quote, little common purpose but the perpetuation of itself and its procedures. So, as Wellman's argument continues, if students or any other constituency of the modern university want to find moral traction on any contemporary issue, they must look beyond the confines of the institution itself. In other words, any moral relevancy or credibility must be external to the university. As Wellman suggests to his readers, university presidents like me or my friend Teresa Sullivan at the University of Virginia are nothing more than, quote, captains of erudition, in the words of early 20th century economist Thorstein Veblen, and, quote, not the leaders of a community bound to common moral mission. To summarize, Wellman offers this final nail in the coffin. Quote, the university has moral limitations and cannot impart comprehensive visions of the common good. Well, I wonder what George Whitworth would think if he read those lines. I wonder what President Frank Warren or what President Bill I happen to think I know what President Bill Robinson would think of those words. These three presidents of Whitworth and the 14 others before me spent their professional lives, as have these faculty and staff before you, articulating a different vision for higher education, and for Whitworth specifically. Whitworth University was founded 127 years ago with a dramatically different set of contrasting foundational principles as those that Wellman gives. In the mold of many 19th century Christian church-related colleges and universities, Whitworth was established by the church and for the church, and as such reflected the Christian church's mission to renew minds and hearts for service to Christ's kingdom through higher education. Encouraging morality, that's a Freudian slip, encouraging morality, as it were, was, and I would argue still is, at the center of this university's mission. After all, how can we at Whitworth boldly claim a mission that reads in part that we will equip graduates to honor God, follow Christ, and serve humanity without concerning ourselves with moral goods? If, as Wellman suggests, any moral enlightenment that would shape the experiences and learning of our students must be imported from external sources, how could we claim, as we do at Whitworth, to provide an education of mind and heart to service to humanity? I suspect that Wellman is very unfamiliar with the landscape of Christian higher education today. A quick look at his resume reveals he has degrees from the University of California at Berkeley and, ironically, Davidson College, a former Presbyterian church-related university in North Carolina. Now, to be gracious to Wellman, his experiences have likely not exposed him to many of the great Christian institutions that continue to dot the landscape of higher education in this country. Places like Whitworth and Wheaton, Calvin and Westmont, Gordon and Hope, just to name a few. Places that, although they may differ in some small and dramatic ways from Whitworth, are still concerned with the moral dimension of education. If Wellman did visit Whitworth's campus, I think he would be exposed to a very different way of thinking about the university and its role in discerning moral truths. He would find a university here that is first and foremost a place of real education. We at Whitworth claim, like the late Father Theodore Hesburgh of Notre Dame, that in order to be a great university, Whitworth must first be a great Christian university. Whitworth must first be a great university. Although founded by the church and for the church, Whitworth is not a church. We are an educational institution. And therefore, we have a different, although I would argue complementary, set of aspirational principles. We strive, for example, to be a place that models intellectual openness, open-mindedness, humility, and curiosity. Founded in the Reformed tradition, Whitworth boldly states that all truth is God's truth, and as God's created, we are free to explore God's creation, wherever those explorations may take us, with the confidence that God will meet us at those mysterious destinations. Whitworth's commitment to education pledges it to be a place where both orthodoxy and orthopraxy can be challenged with humility, and where dissenting opinions are welcomed in a culture of hospitality and grace. When we are at our best, we have the courage to invite dialogue and opinions onto this campus that may not always represent the mainstream of Christian thinking, if there is such a thing, without thinking that such hospitality threatens either our Christian witness or our university's Christ-centered mission. As our own professor of theology, Jerry Sitzer, reminds us, at its best, Whitworth is a bullseye institution, and as such, we spend far less time patrolling the boundaries. But what is our bullseye? If Wellman were to visit Whitworth, I'm confident he would also find a place of deep and faithful conviction. An institution and its people who are persuaded that the Christian faith has many resources to offer to the educational enterprise. As a group of Christian scholars, we see the life of the mind as not only a useful pursuit, but also as a worshipful response to a God who has, in God's divine wisdom, gifted us with curious minds, passionate hearts, and a wondrous universe to explore. We at Whitworth, those of us on the faculty and staff, and many of you students, believe in the person of Jesus Christ, who was present at creation and redeemed that same creation to himself through death and resurrection. And we believe in the authority of Christian scriptures as our guide to faith and practice. As we acknowledge and educate our students to the variety of competing worldviews that they might experience outside of the pinecone curtain, Whitworth unashamedly privileges the Christian worldview, informed by the person and teachings of Christ, the Bible, and the witness of the Church Universal. And importantly, we do not see these additional commitments as burdensome to what would otherwise be a more carefree educational journey, but rather as important resources that contribute substantively to that same journey. And importantly, and here it is, friends, that give us the ability to navigate difficult moral dilemmas in the pursuit of the common good. At Whitworth, we are animated by this notion, and without it, we quickly lose our distinctiveness and value, in my opinion. Well, as much as I firmly believe in this model of education, one that may be foreign to Chad Wellman but should be familiar to many of us here, I am troubled at times as I concern myself with its durability in an age of increasing division in society and within the Christian church. And during a time when many people seem to lack the willingness or the ability to engage in constructive civil dialogue on important matters that divide us. In the pursuit of moral discernment and clarity, I'm increasingly persuaded that we might also ask too much of our institutions. And here is where perhaps Wellman's critique might have some of its origin. As the leader of a historic missional institution, one with diverse constituencies and one that attempts to occupy a faithful middle on so many difficult contemporary issues, I have personally observed an increasing number of people who want the institutions, companies, churches, political parties, or products that they frequent or use to line up perfectly, and I mean perfectly, with every personal conviction, every theological position, every doctrinal stance, every ethical choice, and even every political figure that they may personally espouse. Otherwise, those same institutions, in the eyes of their discriminating constituents, are immediately discardable. They're written off and cast aside as morally corrupt, ideologically warped, or simply an embarrassment. Church pastors tell me frequently that the past several years have been among the hardest they've experienced in ministry because parishioners want to substitute humble biblical teaching and Christ-centered fellowship with fierce and uncharitable political and doctrinal infighting. If a preacher even hints at a discernible biblical truth that cuts across the grain of a deeply held political belief, she receives blistering emails. Or critics simply leave the church and search for a better echo chamber to validate their own perspectives. I've experienced some of the same things as Whitworth's president. If Whitworth doesn't overtly support and advocate for a particular position on any number of issues, from the environment to reproductive rights to the inclusion of LGBT persons, and I'm not making this one up, which cola is featured on our athletic scoreboards on campus, Coke or Pepsi, then donations are threatened. Scathing Facebook rants are proliferated. Members of our community are publicly shamed. And the very essence, value, and identity of Whitworth is questioned. Institutions, Whitworth included, aren't perfect because we are, of course, filled with imperfect people, me chief among them. And they can certainly never strive to reflect perfectly the personal convictions of every single constituent. In their pursuit of moral clarity, institutions will sometimes get it wrong in the eyes of some. And when that happens, constituents should hold their institutions, including Whitworth, accountable in ways that encourage dialogue, foster healthy disagreement, and work for changes that they think are important. But friends, those things are only possible when relationships are maintained, when trust is rediscovered, when grace is extended, when perspectives are challenged, and when empathy is in generous supply. But getting back to Wellman's article, my point is this. Perhaps the moral impotency that he describes is a function of the expectations we place on institutions today. I've personally experienced the almost PTSD-like symptoms of fear and nausea and dread before pushing send on a university communication that I know will incite outrage in some corners of our university. Might leaders and institutions be less likely to seek and articulate moral clarity when the stakes are so high, when constituents are so uncharitable, and with personal reputations hanging in the balance? Is it the case that so many formerly Christian institutions of higher learning have jettisoned their faithful missions, in part in the hopes of satisfying increasingly pluralistic and, yes, vigilant constituencies? Might Chad Wellman's disdain for what he saw as a muted and morally ambiguous response from his own university toward the awful events that occurred there be rooted in some way in the inability of institutions and their people to posit what they see as moral clarity without being institutionally and personally smeared? Could our society's inability to have and sustain civil discourse on difficult issues be a function of our own fear and fear of leaning into complex issues that divide us, lest we be quickly labeled as hateful or ignorant? And importantly for us this morning, at the beginning of Whitworth's 128th year, might institutions like Whitworth lose their way as a result of these forces? Well, this year, the Whitworth community will have a chance to think about some of these important issues as I host the President's Colloquy on Civil Discourse. During 3 evening sessions in October, February, and April, my office will be supporting an intentional effort to lean into some of these difficult issues and to equip our community with some resources that I hope will sustain our distinctive culture and mission. Other efforts at tackling some of these challenges will be offered through ASWU, our Speakers and Artists series, and other academic presentations. And I look forward to the ways these conversations might equip us, the Whitworth campus. Friends, I must confess that I am very optimistic about this place. And my optimism derives from looking out at all of you, our students, faculty, and staff, alumni, and friends. If any place can do this, Whitworth University can. To close, I find it instructive that at the end of Chad Wellman's article, he shares that after the frightening events he and his family witnessed in Charlottesville, he and his wife sat his children down and spoke to them in the language of his own faith tradition. Quote, in terms of the image of God, of the church, and of Christian love, end quote. Friends, I'm grateful that Whitworth doesn't need to import these resources, but rather allows us to bring these important commitments with us each and every day as we seek the common good and the flourishing of Christ's kingdom. May God bless you this semester. Thank you.